Hello, everyone. As bullets and bombs fall in Ukraine, Russia is waging an expanding information war, using fake accounts and propaganda to spread fears about various issues about refugees and rising fuel prices while calling the West an untrustworthy ally. Now, the European Commission has been trying to tackle the spread of online disinformation and misinformation, just recently bringing together a wide range of players to commit to a broad set of voluntary commitments to counter these methods. And joining us on today's stream to talk about this is Paolo Cesarini. Paolo is currently a member of the executive board of the European Media and Information Fund, a philanthropic fund established in partnership between the European University Institute in Florence and the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon. The foundation that supports investigative journalism, research on digital media, and information literacy projects. Paolo, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you first, what does Europe currently do about misinformation and disinformation? Many people don't know, of course, that this war is going on online. And what does it aspire to do regarding this new strengthened code of practice that was signed this past June?
Well, you know, tackling disinformation is something that the European institutions have been doing for some while. It started already back in 2016 when the elections in the US, the presidential election of 2016, and then the referendum in Great Britain showed that there was a strong element of foreign interference and influence in those democratic processes. So something had to be done. And of course, disinformation it's something very difficult to tackle because it is not about censorship. It's not about silencing voices. It's rather trying to establish a new balance and a new transparency in an ecosystem which is more and more dominated by media such as large platforms. And audiences are not always aware either of what is going on behind their own screens or of the manner in which the content that they receive on their systems is actually treated and moderated by these platforms. So it is not, it is a fight for freedom of expression, not the other way around, fighting disinformation to reestablish the right of everybody to receive and impart information in a manner that is conscious and is transparent and is understandable for those who are the main recipients of this of news. Having said that, of course, you mentioned an initiative which is very important, the initiative that is the Code of Practice on Disinformation. Platforms have been on the front line of attacks for them, for their inability so far of tackling the issue in their own houses. Things have been progressing, and on several ways, the new Code of Practice, which comes under a broader framework. The framework is the Digital Service Act, which will be adopted next September, and which should contain very strict commitment and strict sanctions in case of violation of these commitments. So what the platforms are supposed to do right now is to step up their efforts in order to demonetize websites that regularly post disinformation, so remove advertising from those websites. They need to be serious about not to give incentives to other actors that use advertising as a means to spread disinformation as well. They are also asked to be more transparent when it comes to political advertising and to do much more when it comes to ensuring the resilience of their own services. Their services vulnerable. There is a lot of bad actors that can manipulate their services by using bots, by using fake accounts, by using techniques like impersonation, but also by looking at the way these techniques evolves over time, and therefore to be more conscious themselves and to be more cooperative between themselves. I'm talking about the big platforms, but also I would like to include the smaller platforms when it comes to detecting new ways for bad actors to manipulate the online space.
Okay, so while we keep a lot of things from what you said, but mainly starting September, there is going to be a new framework implemented, and through this framework, there's going to be sanctions, consequences to those who do not abide by this by the new rules.
Now, basically from September on, big platforms, in particular the very large platforms, those who have more than 45 million active users on a monthly basis, will be obliged to self-assess their own systemic risks, so to review their own systems. And when I say to review, I mean to review the functioning of their own algorithms and the way their recommender system actually works, and whether or not they give too much air to information that it is detectably there because of manipulations operated by certain coordinated actions by purveyors of this information. But also, actually, they need to do more, to give more tools to the users in order for them to flag instances where users believe that they're faced with disinformation. That is very important as a first step. The second step is that they need to disclose their own data, and that will be a real novelty. So far, we have been believing to the good efforts that platforms have been deploying in order to improve the way they tackle this challenge. But we didn't have access, the research community didn't have access to the data to see whether or not that was really the case and to what extent these efforts were well directed. And thirdly, they will have to submit themselves to independent auditors. So this scrutiny, this oversight will be exercised by independent bodies beyond the control of the platforms, but also beyond the control of governments. So will be independent bodies that will judge whether or not these efforts have been sufficient. And fourthly, if the independent auditors comes to the conclusion that the efforts deployed, the mitigating measures put in place are not sufficient, and if the platforms do not do enough to correct these errors, there will be heavy sanctions going up to 6% of their global turnover.
Regarding now Russia, Paolo, do we know of any specific misinformation campaigns, and how has this framework, the existing one, how has it protected European citizens from reading this content?
Well, there had been an intense activity. The European Digital Media Observatory has stepped up really its efforts as well for detecting on time the type of narratives that were emerging right after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And there are a number of narratives that have been emerging as particularly powerful. One, just to mention a few, one is the story according to which the Russian invasions is justified because the conflict, in fact, is a proxy conflict, and Russia is defending itself against a NATO aggression. That is something as a form of propaganda which has been aired very much on Russian media since the beginning of the conflict. Another one, it is targeting the figure of Vladimir Zelensky himself being depicted as a Nazi, as you know, as a drug addict, as a Satanist, and other stories that were directed to undermine the credibility of his own political status. Another one, it is about the very sad and dramatic story of the Bucha massacre that Kremlin propaganda tried to depict it as a staged event, so something that never happened in reality. And only thanks to the presence on the ground of fact checkers, in particular those coming from the AFP, from the Agence France Presse, that reported with thousands and thousands of images and videos, the reality of what was happening in the ground, that this narrative was then moved away from the forefront of the Kremlin propaganda. But another thing that is particularly pervasive in the Baltic countries in particular is the link between the Ukrainian immigrants and immigration in general. So the sentiment of xenophobia, it is played as a tool in order to make the integration of these people moving away from war zones into the West, into Western countries, as a danger in itself in the eyes of the populations in the Western countries, because of many stories representing them as rapists or as thieves or people that commit violence towards the population that provide shelter to them.
So, Paolo, this has been incredibly interesting. Large-scale disinformation campaigns are a major challenge for Europe, and they require a coordinated response from European countries, institutions, platforms, as you said, news media, and citizens. And it's hopeful to hear that the Commission has developed a number of initiatives. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Christos. It has been a pleasure.